Good afternoon, Keith Tebow from FRCmedia. Thank you for joining us today. We've spent a lot of time over the past few weeks, obviously the past 16 months, 18 months about COVID and the impact in Fall River. We've also focused a lot about those who have faced housing insecurity because of COVID, and that has led to a number of increased eviction filings in terms of some renters in Fall River and in Bristol County facing some obstacles. And, the moratorium on evictions ended federally this past weekend. And we've talked a lot about renters. Today, I want to talk about landlords and see their plight in terms of how they've been dealing with COVID. Please be joined now by Doug Quattrochi. He is the Executive Director of MassLandlords, which advocates for landlords across the Commonwealth. Doug, thank you for joining me today. How are you?
Thanks for having me, Keith. Doing well.
Tell us a little bit about MassLandlords and the services you provide to landlords.
Sure. We are a 501c6 nonprofit trade association. Our legal mission is to create better rental housing, and you can parse better in a variety of different ways, more affordable, safer where you want it. But basically, we're set up to educate owners and managers of residential real estate. So we have a monthly newsletter. We've got thousands of pages of free educational content on our website. We run these educational events over Zoom now, but it used to be over dinners and lunches. So really, we're about raising the bar and making sure that everybody has equal housing opportunity. And Massachusetts is the best place to own and to rent, and they're not mutually exclusive.
Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about how COVID has impacted the landlords across the Commonwealth. Um, we, as I mentioned in my opening, we've spent a lot of time talking about how some people have not been able to pay rent because of COVID. They lost their job or had their jobs paused. But, landlords have been impacted as well in terms of not collecting some rent while there's been some moratoriums and the like. Talk about what are you hearing from your members in terms of how they've been able to deal and maybe even, survive through COVID.
Sure. Well, there's this perception that landlords are rich and powerful, and some certainly are. But in Massachusetts, there are 70,000 what we call mom and pop landlords, people who live in their building like I do. This is the second floor of my three-decker. And we operate these small wood frame houses, singles, duplexes, three-deckers, all across the state. And we need the rent to pay our mortgage, taxes, insurance, and make repairs. And during the pandemic, I mean, we mass landlords didn't advocate against an eviction moratorium because it was a terribly frightening time, and something had to be done to say, okay, everybody stay put until we figure this out. But what we needed to follow up the moratoriums with was rental assistance very quickly, because, for instance, although a lot of small businesses got access to Paycheck Protection Program loans, landlords couldn't get that because we don't have W-2 employees. And although a lot of homeowners got mortgage forbearance, landlords couldn't get that either, mostly because we had to live in the building. And a lot of us own the building across the street or on the other side of town. And under mass law, landlords are required to make repairs, even if the rent's not coming in. We have to provide a safe and sanitary home for our customers. And that's very difficult for a lot of people who didn't have savings, because suddenly you've got to pay all these bills, mortgage, taxes, insurance, make repairs, and everybody's out of work. So there's no rent coming in. So it's not simply a matter of not collecting rent to add to the landlord's coffers. A lot of us, very blue collar jobs, were fixing doors and plunging toilets and stuff, and we needed to eat and pay for medications and healthcare too. And it's just really hard to do if our business is shuttered and there's no assistance for it. So the pandemic was a really bad time for everybody, and it wasn't any better for landlords.
Now, in terms of advising some of your members during this period, especially as early 2021, when people are getting vaccinated, some people going back to work, we have seen an increase in employment. Are you giving advice to your members in terms of how to work with those that are renting that have probably been good tenants for a while, fell behind because of the pandemic and loss of jobs, and in working together to make an equitable agreement for both parties?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we've played a major role in educating owners and also helping the state to understand landlord needs. So, for instance, when the state moratorium was passed, we helped people to understand the health and safety exceptions where you can still get into court if you needed to. And more importantly, since the eviction diversion initiative was launched here in Massachusetts, when there's been a lot of rental assistance available, we've helped people to access that. And that's really what we want. We want customers and we want to be paid for the very expensive service we provide. And fortunately, there's about $1 billion with a B of rental assistance available. So there's really no reason anybody should be getting evicted. It's just a question of, will the state pay out the rental assistance? Can the landlord get it before they run out of money? Are the renters confident that the state's got their back and they won't move? So we've tried to help everybody stay put and get through this.
Yeah, I know that there's been some stories written. I actually read one over the weekend about how the assistance is available for both renters and landlords. Right? Landlords can gain access to some of that assistance as well. But it seems like in some instances, and maybe you can speak about Massachusetts, getting that money from the state to those landlords and to those renters, um, whether it's bureaucracy or other obstacles, it's been slower than probably a lot of people would hope to have happen. Correct?
Yeah, it's been a really difficult time because the money has been there, but it's been hard to access it. So for instance, my renters and I applied using what's called the owner door, where if you own less than 20 units, which I do, I only own this 3-decker, you as a landlord can apply on behalf of your renters. This is an enormously important tool because a lot of us who are renting in the Commonwealth have so much else going on between healthcare and job uncertainty and illness and loss and social disconnection. Everybody's going through an awful time. If the landlord has any extra time to do the rental assistance application, why shouldn't they be allowed to do it? Now, the state has this synthetic cutoff. I don't understand why, if you happen to own more than 20 units, you can't help a renter apply, but at least we could. We applied in December. We waited and waited, and we were actually finally awarded rental assistance March 1st. And I know one landlord, to give an extreme example, who's been going around the loop for 8 months. And you think, how is that even possible? But there are lots of instances where the application gets turned around because not everything is complete, or something doesn't check with some other state system. So you really got to be at it, you work at it, and you got to be persistent to get rental assistance. It could take a very long time.
Yeah. I want to get into a little bit now about the evictions and things that are, there are a number of renters who are, fearful of potentially being evicted. There have been a number of filings, and I'll get into Fall River specific in Bristol County and the state as well. But, from what you've seen, has those numbers upticked during this time? I guess, how do they compare to pre-COVID times in terms of number of eviction filings?
Sure. Yeah. So it's important to distinguish between an eviction filing and a forced move out.
Mhm.
Forced move out, or what's called a levy of execution in Massachusetts, is what everybody thinks of with the word eviction. That's when somebody comes and physically removes a renter from their home. 5% of filings end up as forced move outs. 95% end up resolved in some way. So just because a case has been filed in court doesn't mean that the person or the household or the landlord are going to end up in this irreparable conflict and everything's going to fall apart. Usually rental assistance or mediation comes in to fix things.
Yeah.
But when you look at the filings, which are something that we have real-time access to, you are able to ask these questions: is it better or worse than before the pandemic? And you have to remember, these are noisy lines, so there's a lot of wiggle in the graph. But everything we can tell statistically is that eviction filings are the same as they were compared to 2019 pre-pandemic. And when you consider how much worse everything is for everybody and how much less rent is able to be paid, that actually speaks to the power of the safety net here, because you would expect eviction filings to be statistically significantly higher. So we don't see that, and it looks pretty much like a normal year, statistically speaking. So I think the rental assistance picture is helpful overall and is working.
Yeah, that's interesting to point out in that there's more about it in the news because uh, people have been impacted so hard by the pandemic. In our neck of the woods, unemployment, even a year ago in the greater Fall River area was 18, 19%. Now we're back to more manageable levels, still obviously higher than pre-pandemic levels. So it's interesting to see that the number of filings are where they were. 2 years ago. Let me ask you about, Fall River and, Bristol County specifically. You forwarded me prior to our interview today some information about the last quarter, the second quarter of 2021, if you will. And Fall River has been rated as a location where, there's been a higher number of filings, and that is, of course, very troublesome to those of us here in Fall River. But talk about, in terms of what in terms of how the Fall River area in Bristol County tends to be on the higher level of those eviction filings, monthly, even quarterly.
Yeah. So each week, actually, Mass Landlord staff, we have a couple people working full time on this. We read all the new case filings for the whole state. And we've been concerned for a long time that the southeastern part of the state, in particular Bristol County and Fall River, keep showing up as areas where there are a lot more eviction filings than you would expect, given the number of people and the amount of rental assistance available. So I mentioned earlier, I think that we had $1 billion with a B dollars of rental assistance available, but we only paid out 191 million as of end of June. So we're sitting on roughly 800 million, and a lot of these applications are timing out. So we'd really like to know, are applications timing out like disproportionately frequently in the Fall River area, such that we could get in there and fix some part of the process that's broken to reduce this number of filings and make it more consistent with what we see elsewhere in the state. So it is still an open question, and I'm glad that you're interested in it and helping folks become aware of it. I would say the number one message for people, and maybe it hasn't got to Fall River very well, but whatever language you speak, call 211 if you can't afford to pay the rent, and they'll point you to a rental assistance application in your language. Almost certainly, we've got so many different languages and translations available. So there could be reasons why people haven't got the message yet in Fall River. I think the word is out there, but that's a really powerful tool the state has, this 211 number. And so I hope everybody who's listening to this can remember that and tell others about it.
I want to get into a little different conversation now, Doug, if I could. The real estate market has exploded with higher prices. People are paying more for one-family homes. I'm sure they're also paying more for rental property. As you're speaking to some of your landlords, those who may be investing a little bit more, they're having to charge rents that are higher for some people that they can afford as renters. How is that balance in terms of making sure that landlords, get the amount that they can for their rent, while also keeping in mind that they want to be able to fill those apartments as well?
Yeah, so housing prices have been really surprisingly higher than ever through the pandemic. In the early days last year, that was because there was nothing to buy. So there's no inventory, no supply, and people were desperate to get out of dense urban areas. So they were paying anything for single family homes. But still, even a year later now, as we're vaccinated, I know Delta's a concern, but still, there's a lot of over asking price offers on single families and multis, and rents are high pretty much everywhere outside of a few properties in Boston and Cambridge. So what we're seeing in a lot of places, Lawrence, Chelsea, Worcester, rents are anywhere from 5 to 10% higher across the entire state outside of Greater Boston. And it points to the number one policy failing of the Commonwealth over the last many decades. We do not permit the construction of new housing, and we don't allow the subdivision of existing lots and structures. We just have really tight zoning controls. We had a housing crisis before the pandemic started, and the pandemic has just really put a spotlight on it. There are too many people who want to live in Massachusetts for the amount of housing that we permit. It's a great place to live. So we'd really like to see minimum lot sizes go away. We'd like to see zoning allow 2 units or 3 units. If you've got an existing structure, you should be able to split that. And until we do something really long term like that, it's going to continue to be the case that a lot of folks are just really priced out. And so that's one of the things renter advocates say to me often is like, Doug, why would any landlord want to evict someone? It's not like anyone else that a landlord could rent to is going to have perfect credit. Everybody's impacted by the pandemic. And that's only true to so far an extent. There are, like, I listed an apartment recently. I had to take the ad down after only 2 days. I already had 6 qualified households submit applications sight unseen, and the apartment was not below market by any means. So it's just really competitive and tough out there, and we need to make hundreds of thousands of new housing units very quickly here. Otherwise, it's just going to continue to get worse.
Yeah. Let me ask you a final question before I let you go. Moving forward, as we hopefully clear out of the pandemic, and hopefully landlords are getting their rent and renters are able to afford their rents for landlords. What are you going to be telling your members in terms of staying tough, staying committed, and helping out wherever they can?
Well, it's always our job to provide housing, and housing is one of those essential needs. You look at the hierarchy of needs, and so if any landlord has the ability to be flexible on conditions, on payment terms, obviously we do that, and that's something that we're going to continue to coach members on. And of course, it's always helpful if you can avoid court to do it. There's a wonderful service available through the Mass Office of Public Collaboration where you can get community mediation. You don't have to go to filing in court, and you can talk to your renter with a third party there to keep the conversation going in a productive direction. So basically, any kind of dispute that you have with a renter, or that a renter might have with the landlord, is resolvable in some way where both parties can come out feeling ahead. So that's really the main thing here. Nobody has to feel like there isn't enough rental assistance, because there totally is, or that the situation is hopeless, because it totally isn't. We just have to talk to one another and work through it.
Yeah. All right, Doug Quattrochi, the Executive Director of MassLandlords. Thank you for your time, and maybe we can catch up again in the future to talk about these issues again. I appreciate your time.
Sure thing. I'd be glad to anytime. Thanks so much, Keith.
All right, thank you. And thank you for joining us today here in FRC Media. I'm Keith Tebow. Have a great day.